So welcome to the Trends in Technical Communications panel discussion. I'm your host today, Robert Rogi. Usually I'm here with my cohort, Tanya Faulkner, but she's sick today, so I'm handling all the hosting duties. So hopefully we do just fine. So yeah, today we're going to talk about trends in technical communications. I think we're going to be talking a little bit about Information 4.0. And basically all the new stuff that's going on, from technology to content. Actually, it's going to be hard to limit the topics as opposed to find the interesting topics. And our guests today are Etienne is actually sick too. So one of our panelists is also sick. It's just one of those weeks. But so we've got Yoni Palmer. And Yoni is currently the CEO of a tech writing services company called TechTav Communication. And he's a member of the TechCom Israel Steering Committee as well, which is super cool. So welcome to the program, Yoni. Then we've got Irina Rybnikova. Got her feet in both streams, I guess. And then we've got Richard Korn, and Richard is the technical communication manager at Medtronic. So he's coming out of the medical industry and surely has a unique perspective as well. So welcome to the show, everybody. Now I'm going to let you introduce yourselves a little bit better. So let's have the full introductions, and I think you can just start with maybe with Yoni on the top right there.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So I have about an hour to introduce myself.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. So
thank you, Robert and Tanya, for inviting me on the panel, and happy to be on the panel with Richard and Irina. So I've been in the industry for around 20 years, living and working in Israel. And for most of that time, actually, I've managed teams of different sizes and global teams. For the last 5 years, I've been a CEO of this tech writing services company. So that gives me the benefit of a range of companies of technologies that we're working with, from the very small startups with like 5 people and a dog to global companies like Microsoft, HP, AT&T, and the like. So hopefully I'll be able to bring my experience to the benefit of the people on the webinar.
Awesome, thanks. So let's move over to Richard, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel. I've been in the medical device industry and labeling localization for over 20 years. And I started off actually on the localization side, building and managing localization teams. And I've moved over into the breadth of medical device labeling, which includes literature, labels, the whole translation process. And I've worked for many years for St. Jude Medical, which was acquired by Abbott, and then for a few years for a company that makes heart valves, Edwards Life Sciences, and most recently I've been working for Medtronic for the past year, running the technical communications team there. I also co-hosted a panel at Localization World for a number of years, and we focused on the life sciences industry. So we brought individuals from different parts of the industry together, along with subject matter experts in content management and other fields, so that we could foster learning and encourage an open forum for a dialogue on best practices in labeling, technical communications, tech writing. This type of forum really appeals to me for that reason, because I see how valuable it is to bring individuals together from different parts of our industry to talk about best practices. So thank you again for including me.
Cool, you're welcome. Thanks for coming on as a panelist.
Sure.
All right, And Irina?
Hello everyone. So my name is Irina Rybnikova. I work for Positive Technologies right now. So it's IT security company. We develop software, we do pen testing. So the whole scope of documents that we have is under my management. I have a team of about 30 people. We create content, we localize content, we help our marketing team, our educational team, support everywhere. And before I worked in IT companies too, so it's more than 20 years. And I worked as freelance translator. I worked as technical writer too. So, so I know all the steps, I think. And here in Moscow, in Russia, we have a really strong community of technical writers, and we communicate a lot as far as localization teams too. So I manage some activities like ambassador, like local launches, like women in localization and other stuff. And the question is for me right now, the main question: what are the types of content that will work with new generations, with someone who comes next? How can we help them to work with our products? What will work in near future? So that's what my question for this session too, maybe.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, so let's jump into the questions, and it's pretty tempting to just jump in with that question, but all right, so let's just go with a generic question here about trends in technical communications. So let's just go around the horn here, and let's hear like one or two current trends or future trends in technical communication, and where you think it's going, at least from your point of view. And then maybe you can work in types of content, because that I think is probably a good point too. And go for it, Yoni.
I can get started, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. All right. Well, okay, so I'm representing life sciences and medical device industry, and very similar to many other industries, especially if you look at the European Union and the way regulations are going. We have a lot of focus on making updates to our literature, multiple updates to the same document, and that basically has driven the whole field. All of the tech comm teams that I've spoken to in the med device industry are looking at content management systems and automation and how they do their work, so that whenever we have that same document, we maybe need to update the same phrase in 1,000 documents. We can go to that single source of truth. We have a consolidated database to use, and then we pair that with some automated translation management system. And so this seems to be the trend. This is definitely the trend in the companies that I've worked in over the years, and certainly is right now with some upcoming regulation in the EU. So I mean, I have other items I could discuss, but I think maybe I'll just let you guys jump in.
Yeah, there's so many, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask just a quick follow-up. Is terminology, are there any new trends in terminology in the medical industry, like managing terminology, or is that kind of like hasn't changed for a while?
No, it has. I mean, so there are two trends that I see along those lines. One is to create a centralized lexicon, and how you adapt taxonomy, a consistent taxonomy within a content management system. So there's sort of more of a linguistic side to it. And then there's more of a trend toward regulations and requirements, and how do you centralize those in a platform, so that you can quickly look at like a certain part of the world and figure out, okay, am I in compliance with that region, that geography? And so there seems to be a parallel path. So I see a lot of tools that are actually focusing on that and how you, not just how we're centralizing our content for use in the documentation that we produce, but also how you tap into the regulations in a systematic way. It may be through some outside source, or you build your own library of content. There's definitely a trend toward the industry coming together through different groups. There's a group in Europe called MedTech Europe that we participate in with many other companies that are that have similar type of products. Same thing in the US, and we see that happening in other parts of the world as well. But so two streams. One has to do with our own content, and the other has to do with content that could be used or leveraged for determining what requirements we're following.
Cool. All right. So there we've got some fodder for conversation. So Yoni, what are the trends that you see over there in Israel?
Well, I'll pick up a little bit on what Richard said before coming to my main point. But yeah, we're seeing companies also moving into single sourcing tools rather than necessarily pure content management tools. And that actually doesn't matter whether it's a large company or a small company. But in order to meet the volume of documentation and to meet the different customizations and perhaps different flavors of documentation, so companies are moving into that more and more. And again, that does help obviously in localization. So we actually we're involved in tools, and we're resellers for a couple of tools, which I don't know if I can mention live, so I won't. But one of the things we do when we're marketing them is to talk about the ease of localization, both working with localization suppliers and the ease of bringing back the content into those tools that the company has. I think the point that I want to make about the trends that we see over here, but I from being in touch with colleagues around the world as well, and being part of the TCOM network as well, we see is that the role of the technical writer today is changing, that they have to be a bit of a hybrid. So they have to be a very technical person on the one hand, as well as a very good writer. And whereas perhaps in the past, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, the writing skills was perhaps the greater part of what a technical writer was required to have, today, the emphasis is becoming much more on their technical abilities. In the startup world, we see that where the technical writers are kind of becoming embedded as part of R&D. So there's, especially with smaller startups, let's say 50 to 100 people, that there's one writer there. So the technical writer will be embedded as part of the R&D efforts, and they'll be treated as an R&D employee, and they'll have to understand code, and they'll have to contribute to the whole process of product development. At the same time, where technical writers are being asked to document APIs, which is also the area that we see growing in software, that they have to be able to understand the APIs, have to be able to translate that into end user documentation, and therefore the requirements again to have somebody who has some kind of a strong technical background. Now that could be either somebody with a degree, somebody who's worked as a programmer or an engineer, but that's definitely the change that I think I've seen in the last 20 years, that has changed in probably the last 5 years, and is a growing trend that we're experiencing over here.
Yeah, everyone has to know Markdown now, I think.
That right? That's that's another aspect as well. And to a degree, when we're working with the SMEs and when they're looking to hire somebody in, so they do have this long list of technical requirements, which to a degree I believe that a good technical writer worth their weight in gold should be able to transition from one technology to another. But nevertheless, because some of the back-end technologies are complex, there are requirements, but as you said, for Markdown, and then also for some of the behind-the-scenes technical knowledge for people to understand and to have as well.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So let's go on to Irina, and then we'll circle back around and hit all these topics, because I have some questions too.
I totally agree with Yoni and Richard that that continuous localization, single source, terminology management, and I think writing for translation is what we need to have in all the companies. Doesn't matter if it's a startup or a big global company. And now technical writers or all the people who works with content change their like roles, and they started like more developers than just writers. They doing more analytics than just writing, because they have a lot of like information from your users. From the users, you can see statistics, you can talk with them. But by the way, we have chat with our users, like in Messenger, so we can just ask them what do you want, and get a quick reply. So you need to be like to think global. I mean, you don't need to think about the simple article, but you need to see to understand how your content will be within the content strategy. What is the role of the content? Who is your audience? How you technically include it into the product or in other documents. So it's like a developer, more and more developing in all the stages. We have architect roles within the company. They're really technical guys, and they help us and our writers to be more like more unique and more deeply implemented in the whole workflow. So that's my thoughts.
Right on. So let's pick up from there then.
Just 1 second. Okay.
No, you go.
I asked people on Lock World, what do you think about it? I mean, do we really need it? I mean, single source, continuous localization, other stuff. Everybody raised their hands. But when I asked them, do you really have it? Almost nobody did the same. So we have a lot of like scope to do in all the companies, I think.
Huh. Well, that's actually a pretty nice place to pick up too. So what are the barriers for companies that are trying to implement single source tools? Like if everyone knows that they should do it, what are they struggling with?
So I think that if a company wants to be effective in implementing single source, there needs to be a global strategy and a strategy that incorporates more than just one group. What I found in my experience in recent years is that a lot of organizations talk about having master data management, and some are actively pursuing that. And then there are parallel tracks where a group like a TechCom or TechPubs team is creating its own form of single source. So to be effective, you really need to integrate it into a larger strategy. And what I've seen at least in the med device world and life sciences in general, is there's a focus on bringing in a CIO who can manage this type of thing, and then integrating all of the different elements of the development lifecycle into that centralized single source of truth. What we've done and what I've done in my previous organization and now starting where at Medtronic is developing data models, really paring down and dicing what type of content we use on a regular basis, and then incorporating that into a content model in our component content management system. So what I've found over the years is that the localization industry tends to be much more advanced along these lines, just with translation memory and all the different types of software over the years. It's been much more developed. And so what you find is there'll be content being submitted for translation from, and it ranges from maybe some kind of structured tool to Microsoft Word, but then once it goes to the localization supplier, it goes through a pretty sophisticated set of transitions and eventually comes back to the to the organization that side of it on the component content management side and the organizations that are providing the source content, that is becoming much more sophisticated and starting to reach the same level of like parity. And I feel like that's where the trend is going right now. And component content management, however it looks, whatever type of software you use, it's really what is driving the innovation on the tech literature side. So yeah, I'm interested in hearing what the other panelists have to say about that as well. I know this is my experience in the medical device industry. Maybe
I'd like to pick up on what Richard was saying, that this is actually something we experience not just in the medical device world, but I'd say across the board, to be honest, that you know, this need for single sourcing. But in answer to Robert, to your question, what are the barriers? I think there are 3 or 4 barriers essentially that are holding people back from moving into it. I think the first big thing is education. In a sense, what Richard has described, and Irina as well, is that they're aware of that, and also we're aware of that. There are many technical writing teams out there who aren't aware of what single sourcing can bring for them in terms of the financial benefits, the efficiency benefits, the quality benefits, and again, the smoother operation with localization vendors as well. So I think that there needs to be a lot more education of what single sourcing tools can bring. Definitely a big barrier is the migration of legacy content. That's normally the largest part of the project in terms of finance, because if a company has obviously a lot of legacy content, how you move that in is going to be a big issue. And often the issues are not with the tool that you're moving into, but there are issues with the legacy tool as well, especially if we're talking about something like Word that has a lot of stuff behind the scenes in the XMLs that has garbage that will need to be dealt with before coming into the tools. So the migration and then obviously kind of like the financial issue as well. I think those are some of the barriers, and also a lot of companies that are growing and they have different teams that they bought, you know, companies and things like that, where different teams might be using different tools, and there becomes the question of, you know, who do we unify, you know, and what kind of tool do we use to unify? So that's a question that sometimes companies, I think, are reluctant to get into because there could be turf wars and that kind of thing. And therefore, interestingly, a trend that we're seeing now with, I'd say, the large to medium-sized companies in Israel and multinationals that have centers in Israel, is the move to a kind of, I'd call it an envelope or an umbrella type of platform that is able to draw all the content from different content sources, whatever tool somebody's using, and to present it in one unified form on the company website, and using powerful algorithms and search engines to pull that kind of, whether it's PDF, whether it's coming from something like Madcap Flare, whether it's HTML, PDF, video, sometimes different ways that the content can be pulled in to these powerful engines, but the presentation layer is unified, and as far as the end user is concerned, it's a totally transparent process, and they're not aware of the different content tools that are being used to create that content. So the move to more single sourcing is definitely going to grow, and I think it will evolve, like as I said, with these kind of presentation layer kind of solutions as well, that will aim to bridge the or rather combine different tools that are being used within a single organization.
Oh, that's interesting. So like are these unifying systems, are those kind of like Band-Aids on the real problem, or is that like a long-term solution?
They're definitely long-term solutions. You know, I'm trying to think of a different metaphor. A Band-Aid is certainly not the not the thing I would say. You know, perhaps a way to describe it is if you have a house that has different types of materials that have gone into creating the walls, for example. So you might have some brick, you might have some timber, you might have some foam insulation, and then you'll cover it with some render on the outside, and to the untrained eye, that, you know, it looks like there's only one material that's been used to build that wall. So I think that's kind of a better metaphor, if that's understandable, rather than a Band-Aid. And it's definitely a long-term solution. These are big investments, and you know, that's why it's the medium-sized to large companies that are going in that direction. But they realize that it's actually a money saver, because sometimes the cost of the project on an annual basis could be the cost of like one person's salary annually, and the efficiency savings by doing something like that are, you know, tremendous. So it's definitely a long-term solution, and it's a trend that you know, we're seeing is growing, and will only grow, I think, in the next few years.
I can add something about it, because I had an experience to bring new content management system to the new company. So there was no any CMS before, but we calculated everything, I think, and we covered all the costs during the first year. So now we have only profit from this tool. And what is really interesting is that before I worked with a company that had a lot of legacy and a lot of different departments, as Yoni told, and a lot of different tools, and it's really hard to move it to the real solution, and it moves really slow, but it works finally. So we can do it too. But if you start from the scratch, of course it's like happy time for you. You can like do it and get the result as soon as possible. For example, in our case, we had 3 departments within our CMS tool right now, and we are moving forward to include more departments, but usually they need some assistance with the tool, because tool is like, it doesn't matter if it's word based, so it looks like Word, but you need to understand how the content structure within this tool. So it's really hard to do if you are not a technical writing person. So it's really hard for you to be like involved really good. And that's why we help such people, such departments to do it. And the goal for me for the next year is to do the portal, the website that you mentioned, which includes all the types of materials within the company. So it's really like exciting goal for me. For example, it's something that is really interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. And Richard, you've been at Medtronic for how long? And you mentioned that you're just getting started there, right? Or
I've been in Medtronic for a little over a year, and
right.
And so I've actually had a few different experiences with implementing component content management systems. So when I was at St. Jude, which is now Abbott, we brought on board a tool that we went through an extensive analysis and brought an off-the-shelf tool into the TechCom team, and set it up from scratch and integrated it with our localization process. And so that whole process took a few years. We weren't really focusing on a single source of truth per se. It was more on optimization and also with the tech writers, there's just a practical side of we were using FrameMaker, and we had multiple files that were being checked out at the same time, and it was becoming unwieldy to manage who had the files out and which version of that particular document was the latest one. You've got maybe 10 different product launches that we're working on concurrently, and so it was more of a practical piece. When I moved to my last company, Edwards Life Sciences, they already had a pretty innovative way of using a component content management tool. It was mostly focused on labels, and it went right through the production and distribution line. So we were at the top part of that cycle. And integrating the literature side of it was the big goal, and was sort of the anomaly, which is it's sort of the opposite in other organizations. Medtronic is a third model, which is a homegrown solution. So we have both. We have an off-the-shelf one, and then one that was developed by Medtronic many years ago. It's actually old enough to be at the same vintage as DITA. So it's kind of grew up at the same time as DITA, but it doesn't use that methodology, but has some similarities. So I feel like I'm running the gamut here with the different types of implementations that I could see, and there are pros and cons and different challenges with each. But I think with a large organization that's invested in this type of technology, like Medtronic has, it's easier to make a case to centralize with one tool. And even those parts of the business that have been acquired over time, there's definitely some infrastructure built up to integrate their content into the centralized tool. Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of different ways to do this, and it's not like we're all learning as we go through this process, and there's a lot of pain that you feel when you try something that really doesn't work, and so you kind of learn to not to do that again. One of the things that that's a core tenet that I follow with any implementation is not to modify the content during the course of the conversion or migration process. So if you've got legacy content that you're moving over, freeze it, go through that whole process of moving it into XML for the first time, or from one XML to another XML format, but don't add projects during the course of that transition, because it can be very time consuming and compromise the integrity of your content. So that's just something that I've taken away from all of these different implementations that I've worked on. I think that some of the best CMS applications that I've seen are the ones that are built to accommodate the particular business that they're supporting. And at St. Jude, there was one that was very innovative that dealt with labels and the distribution of products using unique labels with destination labeling in mind. And this is especially critical in the EU and in the EMEA region, and markets that require the same product to go to multiple locations with limited real estate for localized content. So there are some very creative solutions that companies are working on and that are not on the market. It's just systems that have come out of necessity. And I see hubs of innovation in certain parts of the world. There's definitely in the region of Belgium, the Netherlands, it seems to be very innovative when it comes to that type of those systems. And there's the Bay Area in the US and the different areas if you look at the med device industry as well. But certainly that's another avenue that may be overlooked by a lot of groups that are looking at content management, because it's not so visible. It's not like these companies are doing this and trying to sell their product or service. It's again built like a homegrown solution built for that business. So I've seen some very successful solutions along those lines as well.
Would anyone like to chime in?
Yeah, I just want to, maybe also take it back to my point about the changing role of a technical writer, because again, the kind of things that Richard is describing. So, when many of us maybe started, we were working in Microsoft Word, and it was very easy, well, relatively easy to use, despite the foibles that the Microsoft Word has. But when one is working with these tools, you have to be on a slightly higher technical level, because they're not complicated. It's not rocket science, but it's not like working with Microsoft Word and where if one's working with like the labels as Richard describes, or conditions or variables and things like that. One has to work very methodically and be able to maximize what these tools are giving. And it requires a different skill set. It's as I said, it's not just being able to use, being a power user of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office. It's a lot more than that. And maybe sometimes some technical writers are thrown off by that. They're put off because it's above their skill set. So I would say just try and get it and do more and learn about it, because these things are not beyond, they're not rocket science. It's just working one's head around the way that these tools work and how to create the content using them. And they're actually great fun and great to work with.
So I think a common theme here for all three of you is just like change and trying to change something, the way it's done, whether it's one way of doing it or the other, but trying to implement a lot of change. And yeah.
I'd like to add some ideas, because the good content is not only what writers do. The good content comes as a teamwork. You can work with your colleagues, so you can work with a linguistic editor, but we communicate a lot with developers, with functional testers, with marketing teams. So if you are working together, it's easier to get really good results. So in this case, it's really important to work in the same platform, in the same workflow, and some tools allows you to implement functional testers and developers into the proofreading part within the content management system. And it's really easy to do. For example, in our case, they can add any comments to any content that we have. They can look through the whole content. They can add comments and add priority or type of errors just in a web browser. So you don't need to have extra application. You don't need to do something really hard, but you are involved. And as soon as they see all the comments from other people, from technical writers, as soon as they see that we implement everything, they're ready to help. So that's really important too, because it's not like a single person work. It's all we do is together. So yeah.
And so what are some strategies to get people to buy into what you're working on? So like, for example, technical writers, but also other collaborators, when you're asking them to change the way they work or the tools that they use, what are some strategies to make that successful, to bring them along?
Be evangelist.
Just that, and I suppose there must be a lot of organized trainings and stuff.
Of course.
Yeah.
You need to I think first question is to have your support team within top management. If you sell the idea to them, it's easier to sell the idea to the team. Of course, you need to train them all the time. You need to do not only technical training, how to work with the tool. You need to provide examples, best practices. You need to sometimes you need to go with them to the conferences and show that everyone is using it. It's not. It's not something new. You just within the sphere you need to use it. So you can help them to do some internal projects, to research some new functionality in this type of programs, and they will be your angels within the rest of the team. So yeah, it's a really complex work, but the community usually helps, and your personal strengths, emotions helps too. Yeah, sorry guys.
No, don't be sorry. It's all good.
think training by working on live projects helps quite a bit, and learning new software, showing how tools can help the writer optimize their work. It could be the tool itself. It could be some plugins, something that helps with proofreading or redlining files, or content strategy. Just the concept of content strategy and introducing that into the team helps quite a bit. They understand that it's non-linear. That concept can be very it's not clear initially to many individuals what that means and what that entails. Intellectually they may understand it, but then in practice, when they work on files, then they start realizing that they can't put page numbers in a certain section because that particular chunk of content may not be used in the same place in every document. So this just retraining the team on how to write their content, and that there is really a subject matter expertise in content strategy, information architecture, and introducing them to these new roles. And it could all well be within the same title that they have of a technical writer or technical communicator, but they're expanding their skill set. And what I like to do, even if like I'm in an organization like I am right now, where we're using a homegrown solution, I like to make sure that the team understands what the trends are for the technology, and understand constructs that we may or may not be using in full. Like one example is data, and what the benefits are, what the drawbacks are of using something that's more structured along those lines, and introducing them to training and events as much as possible, going to like we have STC, and also there are other organizations that focus on component content management in the US. There's CIDM and LavaCon. These are events that are organized that are really great for writers and other individuals who are in this new sphere. I've worked, you mentioned earlier on the call, Anne Rockley. She's somebody that I've worked with on and off, and she, in her book, really helps quite a bit, and Joanne Hackus in introducing our writers to those trailblazers, I guess you could say, in the industry, so that they, they're kind of redefining what it means to be a technical writer. But I think more than anything else, like I think going along with Irina and Yoni, what you guys are talking about is that it's a jack of all trades, really, is what you're describing. And I find that, writers are being asked to be very technical, absorb the technology, understand how to, use the tools to their benefit, and come up with creative ways of communicating to the stakeholders that the writers work with what those changes are, and how the CCMS and other related tools can help consolidate content and quickly generate it with the same level of quality or better quality than they had before. There's always a push in the world that I'm working in. High quality is number one because of the nature of the products that we produce, but and something that's life-saving, or that could basically be a benefit to somebody. But there's also the same push for getting things out the door quickly, like how can you launch your product quickly? And so it's sort of at odds with the two are at odds with each other. But using these tools effectively, it can help to improve the quality, improve the lifestyle of the writer, and have a better outcome, better output. So I see all of this as just helping to make this a better, just a better flow. And we're probably right at the cusp of that becoming more efficient. I think many of us who are here in this meeting have worked in localization, and that has much more maturity now, and translation memory and how that's used. So I see this being the same trend with the source side. It's just, we're just not quite there yet.
And would you agree with that, Yoni, or do you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's definitely, in terms of the buy-in, one needs to get. It's a question of education. Bottom line is we're dealing with people here, both in terms of the management that we need to get the buy-in to go ahead with the product, and the same thing in terms of the people who need to use the products as well. And therefore, it's a question of education. In terms of writers, sometimes they might be afraid of, as I said earlier, that this is a tool that's going to be above them, that's going to be too complex for them to work with. So, as both Richard and Irina said, it's about training, educating them as to to what these tools are. The other thing is, picking up from what Richard was saying, is that I think it's important when getting management buy-in or buy-in from other teams within the company, to explain to them what the benefits are going to be to them and the company. Oftentimes, technical writers will look at it and say, how's it going to be better for me? How's it going to help my writing process, my content creation process? And really, what we should be thinking about, we should always be thinking about, is what's best for the users. And therefore, what's best for the users is what's best for the company. Therefore, like as Richard said, if we can produce content quicker, better quality, more efficiently, then that's better for the end user, it's better for the company, and there are savings there as well. At the same time, as Irina was pointing out, it's important also that the technical guys can review. We need to make the review process a lot easier. Those days when we're just sending a PDF and they put comments in the PDF, it's nice, but we need a much more interactive and integrated role from these technical guys to be able to, maybe to add content or review content. So, I think the bottom line for me is, when working on these kind of solutions and helping companies implement them, that it's really a question of finding, what's in it for me, for the different stakeholders in the project, and finding what is it for me issue is, and then concentrating on that and then selling to them and educating them in that particular area.
Yeah, and just as kind of a side note to the education topic, I was a technical writer myself for a few years in my 20s, and that would have been in like 2005, 2006, 2007, thereabouts. And there wasn't really an online community back then, at least not that I knew of. But since then, there's so many things have sprung up in the technical communications community, like podcasts, blogs. Like, people are really writing and talking and sharing, and I bet that must really help to evolve the industry and also the people on your teams.
That's huge. I mean, Israel, we're a small country, have like 8.5 million population. So the industry is actually quite small, and people know each other. The geographical distances are not great here. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of different groups and communities here in Israel. There's in the different cities, whether it's Tel Aviv, which is one of the main high-tech hubs, or other places. And there's Write the Docs, there's TCOM, there's some homegrown organizations as well that run community forums, whether it's online or regular meetings and things like that. And that's a very big help. So we have, I think because of that, an extremely vibrant community here that is, sometimes surprises people from outside the country who come and see what we're doing in technical writing here in Israel. They're actually very surprised at how advanced and how tuned in we are to where things are moving.
Right on. That's awesome. So let's transition a little bit. We mentioned earlier writing for translation. So trying to produce content that's going to be easier to localize, and I suppose content that's like machine readable is going to be easier to machine translate. So we only have so much time left. So why don't we pivot to that topic? What is the process looking like today for trying to prepare content for localization and incorporate machine translation into your workflows?
Oh,
Well, I mean, go ahead,
okay.
Irina.
Oh, we have style guides that we like did for a few years before, and we use it like within the team. We have editor that control that we use style guides, and we work a lot on the terminology. We need all the terms has the only one meaning, and it's hard. For example, in our like sphere, streets calls differently. They have a lot of slang names, and we are producing not only internal terminology, but we are providing terminology for the sphere we work in. So we upload some terminology bases on GitLab, like on open source basis. So that's how we like trying to do it more useful for the whole IT and security sphere. Mm, but it's hard work all the time. We checked like a month ago. We checked how it works in different direction. I mean, we tested some MT engines and we compared the results with the human translation estimation and machine translation estimations marks, and we got really high results. It means that we are doing our job really good as a source text, as a source language, as a like yeah. So we of course we expected some like good marks in this case, but we didn't realize that we did it really good before. So it helps in any directions, right after. So the hardest part was to approve my team that it was to do. That it was to do the same like sentences, the same starts, the beginning of the sentences, like the same structure of all the articles within technical documentation. Of course, not marketing materials, but when we can use it. So that was the hardest part, I guess, to implement. Yeah, thank you.
So one of the challenges that we face is the types of products we have are used directly by patients. The literature that we produce is used by patients. It's unique even within the medical device world because in most cases the documentation we're talking about or the systems are used by clinicians. So we have to not only think of localization, but we think of what is the level of language that we're using. And if you look at the U.S. system, it would be considered the 6th grade level, which is basically allowing for simplified English and comprehension by individuals from a wide range of educational levels. So there's that element of our work, but beyond that, we're also looking at how the systems are used, and we have a GUI or user interface that may or may not be localized. So depending on that factor, we have to customize the content to ensure that we're describing it in a way that someone who's using an interface in English, for instance, or maybe another language that isn't the main language for that country, that we are creating content that can be localized in that respect as well. We are making use of education for across the organization, and we're pretty lucky to have a team that just focuses on ensuring that writers and other individuals involved with constructing content, either in the software or in the literature, that they understand what the value is and what some of the tricks are for writing effectively for translation or for a global audience. And there's a whole training series that that the organization offers, and there are individuals who meet with the different groups that work on the systems, and so that they'll take examples from the actual software and or other systems platforms and say, okay, in this case, where could we make this more localization friendly? So there are all different levels that we're working on. I mean, I've talked quite a bit about the tools and what we do from that perspective, but there's also the educational side and kind of familiarizing individuals with these concepts. That sort of, once they understand that, they start looking for those things. And some of the standard elements too, like expansion for certain languages and creating enough space in systems to accommodate that, and then the shrinkage in other languages. So it's all the standard stuff that you see, but it's not apparent to a lot of the individuals in this process. So it doesn't matter how long I've been in this field or that I've been working on this. There are new, you run across new core teams, new engineers who really have never faced this before, and it's brand new to them, and it's kind of enlightening. So I think all of these different techniques help to build a better end product.
So I think the common theme there is education, which I was going to mention as well. I think it has to start with the education, because it is about knowing how to write the audiences that we're writing for. I think certainly if one knows in your particular industry that there is a standard terminology, so maybe, as Richard I think was hinting, that for the medical industry there might be some kind of standardization. There's obviously STE, which started in the aviation industry. I actually, in one of my teams, we had a program to look at simplified English and how we could incorporate it. We didn't implement it in the end, but it was a very interesting exercise to at least make people aware of the issues that we had. I mean, I had a team of native English writers, but some were British like myself, some were American, South African, and they're bringing different terminology to the table. So that was it was good exercise to help people understand that they need to standardize the way they write. So yeah, I think education is a big issue, a big part of things, and for people to understand that we're in a global environment today. We need to produce documentation content for a global audience, and this is a way to make it easier and make the translation process, the localization process, easier as well.
Right. So we're running out of time here, but I guess we can go a little bit over. Does anyone have to run like right now?
I have about another 5 or 10 minutes. I have another meeting to go to.
All right. One last question that kind of ties into education. It kind of ties into evangelization. I think it ties into managing your teams probably too. Like what are the trends in terms of like analytics and metrics and data collection? And just like what are you trying to do to use those things to achieve those objectives today? And what's the trend with that?
I mean, we're seeing definitely more requests for analytics as part of content. At the moment, what people are using, let's say, obviously for web-based content, they're actually using Google Analytics. That's seems to be the major player. But to my mind, it's still in the embryonic stages of what people want to do, what they want to get out of it. And I think there's, it's just the beginning of the journey, and there's a lot more to do. I'm sure there will be more tools that will come out that will aid the analytics process. But generally, where people are trying to get to is to find out which content people are using the most and whether that content is helpful or not. So that obviously they can put their resources where where they're needed. But as I said, very much from what we experience here, it's still in the very beginning stages of of full analytics.
Right. Does anyone else want to
And
chime in on analytics?
yes.
I was just going. Okay,
Richard?
go ahead, Irina. It's fine.
Okay,
I'll
thank
wait.
you.
We could flip a coin, but
for
we're on.
numbers from Google numbers from Google Analytics is not enough for me, because we can just like suppose what they mean. Of course, we can understand that people visit such pages, and some of them are not like visible never. But what really users wants to see, we don't know. In this case, I think we are doing more user experience testing within software, and we are joining our questions to our designers' questions, our developers' questions. So we are trying to find new scenarios that will help our people, our users. And we're trying to implement such scenarios within the interfaces, not only documentation. Documentation is like, I have, in one product, I have 9 documents. One of them is 1,600 pages. Nobody read it, never. So they just need to get the exact information, they get exact answer at the same place there right now. So we are thinking about scenarios. We are thinking about it with analytics, UX designers, everyone, and we are trying to like give answers to the people within the interface from the content we have. We have a lot of reuse content in this case, but we need to like do sushi delivery for our users and do exact answer to their questions. So that's a hard point, and I think it's something that we can do next few years. Yeah.
Nice.
Numbers is not enough. Yeah.
So my experience, I mean, then tying into something that Irina just mentioned, that's kind of triggered. We are heavily tied into human factors studies. We test the product as a whole, and the literature is part of it, the system is part of it. So that's a key component, and there are defined ways to measure how effective the usefulness is of the whole package as part of that process. As far as what we do within our technical literature and how we focus on what we're measuring is we measure rework in our daily work, our production cycles, and we're tied into the Six Sigma Lean methodology quite a bit. So this principle of DMAIC, which you may be familiar with, it basically allows us to go through in a systematic way to define and measure what's working, what isn't working, and then focus our attention on those items. It's also a great way of involving the larger team, because the individuals who are running these projects are also, in many cases, technical writers or other members of our TechCom team, and they can track the different types of inefficiencies that they're trying to address, and then over time see how effective they are. So as an example, we were looking at how we release our content in our product lifecycle management system, and we had a cycle time of 35 days back in 2018 at the beginning of the year. And then at the end of last year, we were able to get down to 13 days. And there were various ways that we achieved this goal. It wasn't just one way, but we looked at how effective the flow was as a whole. Our goal was to reduce the amount of time it took to get these files released into production, and so the metrics just fell in line with those goals. So I've been in organizations that really focus quite a bit of attention on metrics, but I think the main thing is to figure out what you're trying to achieve and not not necessarily just measuring for the sake of tracking. It doesn't work. I don't feel like it's effective. It doesn't add value. So I hope my audio is still good, but if you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you. We can hear you good.
Great.
Yeah, we use, I'm in marketing now, and we use a lot of analytics, but it's true, sometimes it would be better to just stay pure to your mission, I think, because using metrics and analytics adds a lot of work. I don't know how else to say it. It's a whole process all by itself. So
I don't know if if anyone on the panel or in the joining this call has read the latest issue of the Harvard Business Review. I think it came out last month, but there's a whole section about analytics and metrics and the value of what you measure. And I believe it's in the last month or last 2 months, but it's interesting. Just there's a whole analysis of whether it's good to analyze. And so we're starting to question that different industries are.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So we're gonna find that, and we'll definitely share it. Maybe we can share it with the podcast recording or the panel recording. But that's super interesting. I think a lot of companies are drowning in numbers right now.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we should probably wrap up. I feel like we could, like, this was a really good one, and I feel like we brought up all these amazing topics, and I would love to sit here for hours. But I suppose that everyone has to go back to work and implementing these new systems and getting everyone to buy in on it. So, but it was a lovely panel. And does anyone have any parting thoughts?
Well, thank you, Robert, for moderating, and it was a pleasure to meet Irina and Richard, and to be on the panel with them. And I hope I've given over some good information, and I've certainly picked up good information from everybody on the panel as well.
Yeah, likewise, it was a pleasure working with all of you and on this panel and meeting you. And yeah, it'd be great to have maybe a follow-up at some point. See how we're all doing.
The connection is not good for me right now, so I can't hear almost nothing, but I hope you hear me. And thank you for joining me this discussion. I really believe that we'll continue with it because it's not enough time. 1 hour is not enough. And thank you.
No,
thank you again, Robert.
We need to do it again.
Yeah.
The sequel. Okay. All right. So let's do the sequel then next time. And in the meantime, I guess my takeaway is it's all about people and trying. Yeah, I was surprised that the conversation took that direction. So, but so thank you everybody.